Well, welcome everybody. This is episode 31 of season 1 of Bridging Generations with Howard Snooks, and I am Howard. Today I have someone who is a double dipper. He's coming back for the second time, and his name is Luke Hanley. And Luke, before I hand this over to you, I'm going to tell a joke because I always start with that joke. So, why did the rock climber break up with his girlfriend?
Oh, I'm not even going to take a swing at this one.
Okay. She was taking him for granted. Okay.
That's perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about rock climbing today, among other things, like we always do. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to hand this over now to you, Luke, and you can sort of jump in where you'd like to go, and I'll ask a question if I want to go somewhere or another.
Yeah,
okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Howard, thank you so much.
Sure.
Always a pleasure.
Sure.
I've enjoyed this podcast so much because, a lot of people that have been on here that I know and interact with, 5 days a week, hearing some of their stories and foundational stuff is just awesome. And you just are like, wow, the people that's so impressive. They're even more impressive than, I thought. And
their story. They don't even know they have such interesting stories. That's the thing, I think.
How lucky are we to be surrounded by all of that? I'm like, wow, this is great. So, very happy to be here. And, on the rock climbing side, you've been in Colorado. This is a mecca. Have you gone out? Do you have any climbing experiences?
Well, when I was in undergraduate school at CSU, I did do some rock climbing with these two friends of mine. So I did some, ropes and belays and stuff. So I did a little, and it was fun. Yeah. And I've done it. I've hand climbed, many times. But El Capitan is still beyond me.
The world of climbing, when I got involved in it, was interesting because I was catching on to the tail end of a generation that had just a very different way of approaching it. This was almost more like a spiritual practice,
It was.
And climbing is kind of like that. To be at a higher level with it, you have to do it all the time.
Well, I want to interject something here.
Yeah,
I did see the end of my career, I was a doctoral student at the time. I did a fellowship at the University of Colorado, the Student Health Service, psychiatry. And I had a rock climbing client, and he started off saying, I have trouble having relationships. He says, this is really common among rock climbers, to have difficulties in relationships.
Yeah, no. It very much, those 1-3 month climbing trips where you leave home and, you're going to do this and then you come back. And, depending on the type of climbing you're doing, when you watch rock climbing, and if you're not a rock climber, it's very controlled. There's a bit of elegance and control to it that puts a mask on the intense focus and how hard it actually is. People have said there was that Free Solo movie with Alex Honnold.
Yes.
And, there was a comment in the show that was, if you're not I think it was John Long who said it. He's like, if you're not a rock climber, you watch this and you're like, wow, that's really impressive. If you're a rock climber, you feel sick to your stomach. And, what he was doing in that and sort of the perception of the climbing world versus what is actual is very different. So, from this generation and thinking towards the line of mentorship and where I got into climbing, it was a totally different way of looking at it. And I think that the advent of mental health drugs and the commercialization of selling products, making sure your clothing contrasts nicely with the rock tones so that it comes out well for a picture.
Right.
Things that people didn't think about quite as much before. But there was definitely a period of this personality that was, you go out and you do these very intense things, and then you come home and you are living daily life. There's no risk of threat.
Mhm.
You know, what that does, extreme exhaustion and physical and mental endurance and focus, is it pulls you away from everything else and sort of intrusive thoughts in the rest of your life.
Well, how about the triumph that comes from, like, that's a huge feeling. And then you come home and, whoever you're living with goes, well, welcome back.
Yeah.
I've been busy.
Yeah.
I hope you're ready to take part in the
Yeah.
household again. I mean, sort of like damps down the enthusiasm.
You know, it's a lot different. This is like I know that I was talking the other day that the Odysseus movie, came out,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a poem called "The Urn of Odysseus." I think it was the name.
Say that again.
The Urn of Odysseus.
Oh,
and
okay.
it talks about he comes home and he's been
Right.
on this incredible adventure, danger. What do you do? Is it or do you just stop? Do you get into gardening?
Well, you kill your wife's suitors first.
Yeah, get that out of the way.
Get that out of
It's
the
nice.
way. And then
When you
you sort
leave
of-
town, you got to make sure you clean things up before you get too comfortable. It is, I think to some extent, and you look at different human beings, have you ever heard like a NASCAR like idling?
Mm.
You know,
Yes,
it sounds like it's going to explode.
it does.
It's not meant to be sitting still.
Right.
I mean, the thing will burn up if it's
Right.
not in
Right.
motion.
Right.
And so I think people are kind of like that. And the climbing community is a bit representative of that. It's just tuned to operate at a different RPM.
Mm.
And, finding oneself, and I think at one point climbing being a counterculture,
Very
similar
much
to
so.
like a music counterculture, and all this is happening.
Almost like following the Grateful Dead in a way, because you're camping out in your car and
Yeah. Oh,
there's-
absolutely.
yeah.
Very tribal,
Yeah,
kind of going
very
around,
tribal,
and
yeah.
it becomes
Right.
a very small
Right.
world there. And it's also kind of interesting when you look at the history of conflicts that the U.S. has been in. Anytime there was a big conflict, the people who stayed behind were like, we're going to go out and, our friends are dying. We're going to go out and do these incredible, feats and put up these first ascents that no one has ever been, that are incredibly dangerous, that some of which have never been repeated.
Mhm.
And they all seem to happen within these time cycles of when there was conflict and people were being drafted off to war.
Well,
It's
that's a
fascinating.
very interesting thing.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
that's like a little more of an in-depth observation here.
Yeah, well, it's very similar in the music world,
Huh.
very similar, where you see kind of kickoff. It's almost as if when conflict was felt more at home than overseas, and there's probably a larger socioeconomic discussion around that. People were seeing folks in their neighborhood who were not coming back. They were feeling the dissonance internally within the
Mhm.
country of
Mhm.
support and not support. And,
Mhm.
that always becomes very hard because I think a lot of people always, live in the middle and get
Mhm.
polarized or push into one direction or the other. But, within that space, that was the fuel, and the internal piece of maybe it
Wow.
was guilt. Maybe it was a level of privilege. There's a great story, the giant slalom, skiing, another athletic-based thing. They at Mount Washington was the first place of the giant slalom, and it came from a race. It was called I think it was the Fireball 500. It was Dartmouth, Harvard, Yale, all these groups that would go up to Tuckerman's Ravine on Mount Washington,
Mhm.
and the leather boots. Ski
Casting
height
your-
to here,
casting your
plus,
golden cape.
yeah, totally go through, all set up. They would go up here, and there's a very steep head wall, and it's, very, very steep run, and they would just launch off the front of it, just didn't care. And I think this is, this is World War II, and people would get hurt, and it would take 6.5 hours to pack on. So they're like, how are we going to keep this from happening? Let's put in these gates that they have to ski around to slow them down. so that we're not having to like pack people out with broken legs and ribs and all this stuff to go through. But, you know, again, that race, that whole start, all people left behind, likely feeling a lot of guilt. I mean, in what was happening there and how they processed that internally.
Well, I can tell we're going to learn some interesting little things here today. Now, I have a question for you. It's about fear, the feeling of fear on climbing. Now, I think I told you I did some rock climbing. And one time I did fall backward and I was kind of trapped in a crevice, head down. And my friends had to sort of pull me out. That was kind of scary. But overall, it wasn't frightening. Mm-hmm. You know, I had this one frightening moment. And there's other, like sometimes when I've hiked, you know, I remember one time I had to jump over a stream that was going to become a waterfall very soon. So if I fell in the stream, then I'd be, But that was one little thing that was scary. But to me, this, you know, if you're climbing up El Capitan, it's fear after fear after, unless you don't feel fear. And so that's my question. Is there some different relationship to fear that climbers that, you know, are very technical, you know, super technical, skilled?
Some people, and they're a small percentage, seem to not have any fear. You know, they could be hanging out in space with 100 feet of rope and, you know, looking at it about the width of their finger, and they see it rubbing on the rock, and they look at the gear and they're like, somebody else, everything that is supporting here, someone else made. And I'm just trusting that works, that the test, everything was good. All those thoughts start to creep into your mind of, you know, gosh, how would this be a problem? The other 99% of people, you know, I think deal with fear in a variety of different ways. You know, one is, you know, desensitization, right? You go out, you get used to it. I don't like heights. I don't like heights at all. But that fear component of it and the fact that it makes me so nervous feels like a challenge. And that piece is like...
And you do like challenges.
And I like challenges.
Right.
Like a good challenge.
Yeah.
Always love a good challenge.
Yeah.
But, you know, that part of it felt like it hit all of these areas of need to allow me to focus in. And when I think about fear, I mean, I still experience fear and anxiety all the time. You know, I think it's, you know, fear is kind of like, you know, writing drama. It's everywhere, depending on how aware you are and how closely you're looking. I mean, we live with a lot of things in our daily life that we don't see as scary, but are actually probably pretty scary if we think about driving in the car down the road. I mean, you're in this metal object cruising down the road. Right. You have no control going through. Anything can happen. Anyone, you know, riding motorcycles, it's like, you know, a squirrel could come across the road and you go off. So just blocking that out of your mind, and it becomes almost like a form of meditation, because your focus is so intensely needed that you can't allow yourself to think about anything else.
Well, you know, this makes me think of, since I have Medicare, you know, when you get to be a certain age, you have Medicare. And so I went to see my doctor, and Medicare, I don't know if all Medicare policies require this, but I'm sort of required to have a Medicare meeting with the doctor. And so they go through all this list of things. And one of the questions was, well, do you have fear of falling? And I went, well, not until you just said that.
Should I have fear of falling?
Because it's like one of these very specific questions. And there's good reason for it, because a fall can really nail an old person again.
It's one of those things. It's like for injuries, it's one of the highest risk factors.
But now I go, am I in danger of falling?
You know, as the fear component of what can hurt us is such a, you know, that's a fascinating thing in assessing risk. And, you know, people would talk about the placebo effect. not many people talk about the Nocebo Effect. And this
You're
is
going to now.
and just as a setup, as you know, go through. So, Nocebo Effect is things are going to hurt me.
Mhm.
Everything's going to hurt me. This is something that is really expanding across all areas of health, I think, and all sectors. Supplements and food and education and media. There's so much fear-based around it. So, one of the classic studies on this for the Nocebo Effect was a guy who was in a drug trial. I think it was for a sleeping pill or something like that. And he was certain that he had the drug and it was really working. He did not. He had a bottle of sugar pills. He had the placebo. Through whatever mental health screening had gone through, something wasn't caught. And, going through a hard time, he had decided, fortunately, to take his own life. And
Wow.
yeah. And so he took that bottle of pills and he took it back. And his blood oxygen level dropped down to like the 40s, just on belief that it would hurt him. So, it goes into our beliefs become so embedded in our physiology and how we operate that I do think it influences our health, not only physically but mentally. I mean,
Wow. Well, I have heard about this study, and I've heard some other things about placebo effects and how they're being rethought, what a placebo really means.
Yeah.
But it has to do some with quantum theory
Yeah.
and how life is an illusion anyway, and we've just created this one set of reality, and there's these other realities that we could join into.
Mm.
And, sort of like Schrodinger's cat.
Yeah.
The chances are low that you will die of sugar pills, but they're not zero.
They're not zero. Which, to that point, talking about like a lot of these supplements and things that they go through that don't get, go through approval.
Right.
A lot of them that are water soluble based don't hit the one critical factor for approval, which is how much of it does it take before it kills you? And there's a metric in order to be approved, that metric has to be decided. And it's for everything from sugar to, Tylenol.
Well, you'd have to pay you a lot to be one of the case studies of that.
Yeah, no, seriously. I'm like, I hope that happens in a petri dish,
Right.
not in human trials existing out there. But yeah, it's a fascinating world. I mean, it's physical and mental health.
Well, we've gone into the inner world here when we were talking about rock climbing, and I don't think that's an accident. I think that because people are really in their heads when they're climbing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that music side of it as well, it's intense focus. It's being in the moment, all of those pieces. And, in rock climbing, I started rock climbing when I was 15. And, I was dating a girl whose brother was a climber and her dad. And so I had hand-me-down shoes and harness. And I would go through, my family spent a lot of summers up in Maine. And, I would go, out to Acadia on the cliffs there, Otter Cliffs. And with my shoes and harness and ask people, if they'd give me a belay or go through and just make friends. And that was, how I would go out. And then when I was down in Taos, I had a great mentor down there. And I was fortunate enough that the climbing community in Taos was so small that it had so many people who were amazing climbers that, just in the fact of limited supply, I think I got pulled in to go do so many, amazing things and, help out with route development and, going out and really creating, curating the experience for people in that space,
Well, that goes to something that I think is interesting is I think people are kind of drawn to you in that way. Like so here's this 15-year-old kid kind of hanging out. There's a choice that people make. Oh, this is a cool guy. We'll let him in. Or want to stop bugging us, kid. Yeah. And you're on that side where, hey, yeah, come on in and join us. What do you think that is all about?
I think that's that's like strong mom influence there. She's gone through, incredible things in her life, and her positivity, always positive. I remember as a kid, I was very anxious around things. I was a nail biter kid. And she would, she always was like, water on a duck's back, right? Just
equanimity.
Yeah. It's going to be good. It's all going to work out. Yeah. Like, it's all going to work out. And so, climbing is hard. It is a series of problems to solve. It is varying levels of comfort around in an uncomfortable situation. And so, being positive is so supportive, and people want that. You want that everywhere.
It's kind of catching. If you're positive, then it's harder for another person. It's not impossible. Schrodinger's cats. Yeah. But it is much less possible if you kind of have an approachable, open kind of demeanor.
Very much. Because it's, being positive is safe. What do people feel? It's like criticism, right? Criticism is a constant. I think the path to understanding that you can't make everyone happy is, it's like getting to that realization is kind of like how people get into like astrology and horoscopes. It's never a gentle path that gets you there where you're going in and checking this out for guidance.
Well, then that makes me think you're saying the reason why most people are favorable towards me is I don't really care if they reject me. Like I can handle it if they reject me.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'll say I've started my company, right?
Yeah.
And you go out and you're raising money, you're, trying to get this going. So much rejection. You just kind of show up and people say, it'll start off and tell you like, I bet on the jockey, not the horse. And then when it's a no, you feel even worse. You're like, oh gosh.
I was the jockey.
I know. I'm like, why did you have to lead with that? That's a terrible way where this ended. Like, come on. That didn't have to fall out that way. But, you get... It's all in desensitization around the experience and also understanding. Knowledge for me is been the part where it helps me deal with a lot of that, because I don't think about things in terms of, it's not about me. It's other people's story and where that goes through. And you just see that and you don't take it personally. I mean, I get challenged all the time, constantly. I mean, it's one area in my world that I've gotten so comfortable with.
Could you give an example without it, like no identifying details really, but just like, what are you faced with somebody?
I'd stopped working in 2011, 2012. And, I spent, over a decade, with family and moved up the mountains and did all of that. And, that was an interesting time and cycle, because I think when we go through life and we have this person who presents in the world, the person who goes to school, the person who goes to work, the person who's applying for that grant or that job to show up and be like, here is the shiniest part of this penny, pulled out, lint from the pocket, all out. You're like, no, this thing's good. And so you almost create, this sort of bifurcated self, to say. And when you have this time where you don't need to show up in that way, and to an extent be not performative, but be very concise about how, and very deliberate about how you show up within your interactions.
Okay.
You're just be.
Yep.
And you take time with that. And what happens is that person that was created here, that you're so comfortable, you put on the uniform, you put on the shirt, you get in the car, so the routine builds into, and the, you're over here, just meshes into a single individual. And so, when I started my current company, I had not been a CEO. I hadn't worked with like large teams like that. I was coming in. I had no degrees in any of these things, and I just had to self-educate myself. And so, there's a lot of questions of capability, versus coming in with this. There was no I didn't have LinkedIn. I started my company with a Gmail account and a spreadsheet, and just went. And I remember the first person I called, talk about calling, massive, Fortune 100 company, cold called them. Just got online, waded through just to talk to somebody. And the guy picked up the phone, and he immediately said, oh, I meant to send this to voicemail. And I was like, great start. And, my interaction with that company really spurred off a lot of things that happened, future, and yeah.
What did he mean when he said that? How did you read it?
I think he was talking to himself and had the phone and just didn't mean to, open up the call on this. But, I think to kind of kick back into to answer the question is, I think I get a lot of questions on, here's the story, and they're like, well, how can that be? And so what's made me successful in that is being able to prove out the math and the financial instrument component to be supported to the data points, to say, here's the story, and here it is. Here's the nuts. Here's the architecture. The building's going to look like this. Well, how do you know that thing's going to stand and fall down? Well, here's the architecture that supports the design and the narrative to meet it. And so those two pieces together have been huge. But I, constantly criticism. And I work in a very emerging, very complex market, that is evolving rapidly. And, I work, I came from a renewable energy space,
right.
And in finance. And now I work like mostly with oil and gas, trying, to create solutions, to take, the world's largest emitter, who are putting a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere, supported by us, who are buying the products and going through. We can't look around the room without seeing products made of petroleum. And so how do you move that a very tenured industry into the next phase of being leaders in decarbonization?
We need to have good ideas.
Gotta have ideas.
Yep.
Gotta have ideas. And eventually people will make you back it up, I find.
But the reason I said it that way was you almost said, like, well, this guy was just scrolling around and he decided to call me. But he was a CEO of Fortune 500, and he called you. Like, there was something that caught his attention, something that caught his eye. He didn't just that wasn't a random thing.
I mean, it might have been.
Really?
Yeah. No, I mean, this is sort of the thing. The serendipity of how things happen. I go back to it's a lot more Forrest Gump than anything else. I say it all the time. I think that, when you're aligned in your purpose and what you're doing, and you are fully embedded in it, you're living this, it becomes so much part that, the effort that you put into something creates this vacuum, and that vacuum pulls in opportunity around it. And it's the belief system, and I think the positive mentality of being able to say, we can do this. And that was a lot of it, when I originally started in this space, people were like, there's no way. Like, you're never going to be able to do that. That's not, people have tried to do that for a decade. Never happened. And we're like, well, they didn't think about this.
Yeah.
And so, I've watched in the past 2 years from, we had certainly, I work in the environmental space. So, when Trump cut a lot of the, EPA requirements, he basically said, sorry, environment, like that's your problem. Like, we're not so interested in that.
If you believe in that bull crap, go ahead.
Totally. Whatever you want to do, go have fun over there. But we're not going to enforce it. Right. And, in that presidency, we had the same thing recently, an accounting, a quiet little accounting rule that suddenly could have more impact for environmentalism and this transition into a rational scale decarbonization pathway and transition than any government policy could be, and all driven from the balance sheet. And that's always a place where, I've not successfully been super good at convincing people to change their mind, but I've been able to find ways to make things financially incentivized to move in that direction. And so, currency is a huge component of, that liquidity and stream that connects, intention and action.
Well, you're authentically translating a concept into a financial piece. Is what you're doing. It's like you're using other words to describe it. So see, he probably saw something in this. I bet it wasn't just random that this guy called you.
It might have been through someone. There's people you talk to, and then it just kicks off and gets connected through, and there's a cocktail conversation, and then that seed just sits and grows a little bit, and then a phone call's made, and then this goes through, and hey, just want to check in and see what's going on. Yeah. Well,
so I know you're a well-read guy. Have you ever read or heard about Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning?
No.
Well, you come to mind as you're talking. Like, I'm not going to give him. He went through the Holocaust. He was Jewish. He was in a concentration camp, and he developed this sort of mind state, this perceptual state, where he could still find meaning. And he continued that afterward, then wrote this book. And it's been really a remarkable book in the mental health field, especially. But it's written for lay people. It's not a clinical book.
Yeah.
But to me, that's what you were describing, is like the meaning that you put into these things. You have, you are really cathected, is another term that you can use.
Yeah.
I think I used that last.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite words, because it just like captures this, sort of this. There's this powerful electrical charge or semi-electrical charge that connects you. So I'm just saying that's my take on you, that you have developed this idea of your search for meaning. You've had good results in your search.
Good results, but also never ending. Right. I think isn't that one of the beautiful parts of the human condition is our innate restlessness.
Right.
The urn of Odysseus.
I've learned enough. I have enough.
There's always sort of go through. There's always, you come back in, it's how we are. And I think most people we're tuned. There's always, think about the innovation that's happened from people solving problems.
Yeah.
Because something just kind of bothered them. Or this could be a little bit easier, or this could be a little bit different. And it's that striving to make and oftentimes I think it is to make the external better when we can't do a lot with the internal, not to get too deep, but to some extent, we try and influence the outside world, and have an effect when it's harder to do the internal work. We create it outside of ourselves. It's like the comedian story, that so many comedians deal with a lot of mental health issues.
Yes.
It's a huge thing.
Yes. The tears of a clown.
The tears of a clown. Yeah, absolutely. This is like, Emmett Kelly stuff,
Right.
And I think there is a part of that is, you're wanting to make the external feel, because it's harder to make and feel that for yourself.
Well, okay. So this is what I think about this, or my mind went, was we're moving from the transactional era of things and actually having authentic relationships. And that's where man's search for meaning comes in. You have meaning when it's not just transactional or this tit for tat, but there's actually something else that's much more valuable, much more intense, and much more human that you can have when you have this, meaning is what you're looking for. You're not learning, you're not wanting to get a quid pro quo. You're trying to get some meaning out of this.
Yeah, because transactional engagement is very like 2D, right?
Right.
Very, very 2D. When I think people start interacting without a desired income or outcome associated with that,
or income,
or income. I think that I think that they see it opens up to different opportunities that come into that stream, because you just don't know. I mean, you talk about the phone call coming through. I don't know, but it cycles down through.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's we don't know the impacts of what we do and how those cycle through. But I've found that operating a way that feels aligned and from a place of like purpose, it really just, all of the external things start to line up. And it doesn't make it easy. There's always going to be problems. It's a never-ending part of that process, but tomorrow that problem could be solved. Who knows?
Gone with the wind.
Gone with the wind.
Tomorrow is another day.
Yeah. So it's totally another day. So yeah.
Well, you have an exciting approach to life, I think.
I'm definitely on the side of like, I'm that solving and pushing on the front side of it and having big problems to solve is exciting. And
CO2 is a big problem to solve.
It's a pretty huge problem. I mean, there's a whole economic factor associated with this, as far as health, insurance rates. This is a problem that if we don't solve is going to cost each individual, over the next decade. It could increase each individual's annual expense over $1,200 a year, just out of, and that's on the low end. And this is when we talk about, health is a major thing. Our cost of goods, when we think of natural disasters happening that are more extreme, I mean, it's a national security problem. As far as food scarcity with, extreme weather events, like the peaches right now in Colorado.
Desertification.
All of these things. And they're, the sector that we work in is maybe not as exciting for a website where you have like, forests and three-toed sloths and you're focusing on this area. We work in a space that is, more in the renewable fuels sector and advanced fuels to decarbonize with what is already happening. But it's not as great for the website. There's not the media, because the money spent on saying you are green is in a lot of cases more that is being spent on actually being green or investing in these types of projects.
Sort of like when you buy eggs, it looks pretty net when you're buying the eggs there.
Yeah, exactly. So,
it really looks like those chickens are out there in the field. And
if they're not brown with spots, I'm like, there's no way this thing was actually free range. There's no way. There's something in my mind. I'm sure there's no science to back that, but they've got me on the perception of it from a sales perspective.
Yeah. Just put nature's own in front of your product and you're set.
And you're set.
Right.
And you're set. That was a thing. There was a book, I think it was Blake, and which was very popular. I think there was a bestseller. And they talked about Hormel Foods.
Oh, uh-huh.
And they
Spam.
They put a little green leaf on their logo. And it increased their sales.
It does it for me.
Significantly.
It does it for me. I know it. I can see it. And somehow I see it in a different light. I do. I can't help it.
They do get me, I've noticed the rise in prebiotic sodas.
Yes.
The prebiotic thing, I'm like, that's just fiber. That's just that's food. That's everything else you eat. Stop trying to sell us on prebiotic. Like, they're like, you imagine these marketing folks and this, and they're like, we push so hard on probiotics.
Right.
That are to go through. We were petting that puppy a little too much. We need something else here to put out in the market and go in a new branded angle towards health. That is just, this is like advertising and sales and kicks into perception of bleed. And to say, to the nocebo play back, was put into a placebo effect. It is possible that by believing that prebiotics help you, they are helping people. So is it bad?
Well, see, this is where the research is going on that sort of business. This is where it's going. Like, well, why do these things work when there's no basis to them? And something gets transformed mentally that has an effect upon the physiology of the body.
Yeah. At the cellular level,
at the granular level.
Yeah. There was a thing I think they called the French paradox, and the French paradox is they are eating the fattiest foods and so much sugar, and they're smoking cigarettes, and yet they have the lowest rate of health disease.
And their lifespan,
everything is different, but it is that could be well, they're walking more and they're doing other things, or there's less stress associated in their lives in different areas. Maybe they're not worried about going bankrupt on healthcare expenses. Different. But it is to a extent, and I think about like the cigarette analogy of a French person smoking a cigarette, and they're like, "Yeah, America, look, I smoke cigarette. I give cigarette to baby." Yeah. And the American's like, I really got to quit this. This is going to kill me. I don't know when I'm going to stop. I should try the gum. Go through. But that perception and how it relates is so drastically different, and both can be true.
Exactly.
Both are, to some extent, a tap into maybe our internal superpower of being able to influence our health through our belief systems. Maybe.
Well, to me, that's sort of like the frontier here, where we're thinking about what reality means and stuff, which I love. I'm no expert on it, but I love to think about it and talk about it. Yeah.
Well, I talk about a climbing story. So I was in Yosemite, and I wanted to go, and I was going to do, my first big wall, and I was going to do this solo. So I was doing a route on the Leaning Tower, which is, about 1,200, 1,400 feet tall.
I've seen it.
But it overhangs 120 degrees. Yep. So each pitch that you go up, you then have to rappel down, clean all your gear that you put in to ascend, and then haul out jug yourself, climb the rope, and then set up a ratchet system, like a 3-to-1, pulley system to pull all your heavy weight, because you're bringing, you're bringing a gallon of water per day. You've got all this heavy gear. You've got your ledge that you set up, it's like the size of this on the edge of the wall. It's all very heavy. And so you haul it up, you reset everything, and you do it again. So you end up, climbing each section twice and then hauling all your hundreds of pounds of gear and go up. And so, I went out and I had a book. It was like I think it was Jean-André Baudrillard, who was the influence for the Wachowski brothers who wrote The Matrix. And, I was a kid, 80s kid, teenage years, when that came out, it was such an interest. So many things about it were just defining in that era.
And I wasn't too old to get taken in by that either.
Yeah,
at that time.
yeah. I mean, even then, you think about the scenes that bullet time, they called it, where they would move the camera. Like that had never been seen before. Right. Which, a separate topic, but, it's going to be interesting in how people experience movies in the future, where what is going to blow people's mind at that level when you can generate anything you want and it looks amazing. It's different about how people will experience movies and media in the future versus those time periods where we saw really evolution and how things were shot. But, all to be said, I was going up and I was at this ledge, they call it the Awani Ledge, and there was a party of two that came up. I think they were from Wales. And, there were two of them. I was like, well, they're going to be much faster than me. So, sent them. I was like, you could go, I'll stay here. You go, you're going to be faster than me. And, they end up going up, and I spent all day in the sun on the side of that ledge. And, I had a line hang down below, and I got another soloist was coming up, and he's like, hey, can I jug your line? And goes, yeah, go up. So he's climbing up the rope, gets up the ledge, and he asked me, he says, do you want a beer? And, I was very lightweight. Like I had, minimal equipment, everything dried, packaged, just water, very light weight. I mean, that's a lot of weight to carry. And he passed me a cold beer on the ledge, and a single tear, is falling down my face. And we ended up becoming great friends. It was really, awesome time. We decided to pair up to finish the route, and talk about serendipity and how life comes in. So we pair up. We probably get off the wall. We've been on there 3 days, and probably got off a day earlier because we worked together as a front. Well, got off the next day, and this is October. I think it's like October 16th or something. Or 19th. Freak storm comes through, kills all the snow in October. It's beautiful, and killed multiple people in the valley who were on El Cap. There was a couple Japanese teams who were because no one was prepared. It's so nice. Wow. I didn't have any winter jacket. I had like a raincoat. Would not have made it. So if we hadn't teamed up, never would have happened. It would have, story would have been very different, or there'd be no story here at all. But the serendipity of how these things kind of just happen,
Well, this is a good segue into having to say the end of the session. Once again, it's 45 minutes going really fast.
It goes by so fast.
But the serendipity of it all, you and I just happen to belong to the same club, met one another. And now here we're creating these podcasts that are so edifying and enlightening.
Well, it was always a pleasure, Howard, and I enjoy it so much. So thank you.
You are most welcome.
Always happy. Thank you.
Great. Thanks.